welcome to Life After AI, where Alec and I here, we're going to just try to figure out what's going on in the world of AI and how it's going to affect us, yeah, just in a lot of aspects, our business endeavors, in our personal lives, and anything else we can come up with. Today, we're going to be looking at universal basic income, UBI, and try and figure out if that makes sense as AI starts to take over, what it would look like, and again, how it would affect us. So go ahead and jump
Yeah.
right in.
I think it's probably good to preface this on, why we think UBI is probably the next natural step, or at least eventually once AI progresses enough, and why we think, um, UBI is eventually probably going to be, a requirement, at least in my mind. So maybe we should just start out and explain, what exactly is UBI, and then we can kind of go into the logic of, why do we think this is going to eventually be required one day?
Right. So UBI, it's essentially just a significantly scaled up system of welfare. Everybody gets regular income on a monthly basis. And I guess what separates it from welfare is the idea is that not only is this just like kind of the bare minimum amount to get you to keep you alive, it's going to be enough to allow you to live the life you want to live. I guess is what it would look like in the ideal world.
Yeah, and I think, the reason why we kind of think this is going to ultimately be a necessity at some day is because, we're kind of at an inflection point right now with AI where we're seeing a lot of pretty advanced applications come out, at least to what we're used to, like ChatGPT, for example, that's kind of taken the world by storm over the past couple of weeks. And so people are already starting to kind of have the discussion of okay, you know, how many jobs are going to eventually be taken by AI. And I think right now it's a bit early to start, talking all doom and gloom about, AI kind of taking over the world, but ChatGPT, for example, kind of gives us a pretty good idea of at least the initial power and where this is heading. And so
Do
eventually, go ahead.
do we want to? It's tricky though because here initially it's gonna enhance productivity for writers and
Right.
lawyers and whoever's using this, but eventually, yeah, I think it's going to kick them out. So, do we want to
Yeah.
dive
I
into
mean,
that now, or
yeah, we can touch on that real quick. I've already seen a lot of stuff from people programmers, for example, using ChatGPT to significantly increase, their overall efficiency. And, you know, I don't it's hard to put an exact number on it, but I've seen people say "Oh, this is it. ChatGPT has enabled me to 5x my output of what I would normally do." So one programmer can do, the amount of work that five would normally do. Um, and ChatGPT is honestly in a very basic form right now. Like this literally only came out, December, I think it was. So it's it's the very early stages, and we're already kind of seeing, you know, a lot of people that are using this in their everyday jobs. Doesn't even have to be people that are super into the tech world. Like ChatGPT hit 1 million users in 5 days, and now I would imagine it's at several million, probably 5 million plus. Like it's kind of broken out of just the people that are, closely follow tech and kind of already broken out into, I guess, the mainstream world, I would say. Um, And so, yeah, we're kind of going to see in an initial stage where people's efficiency is going to greatly increase and not so much jobs are going to be taken.
right? Um, Thinking of that article you sent about that writer, um, who, you
Mhm.
definitely don't have to be a techie guy to be a writer, but he was able to use ChatGPT to output or increase his output. So,
Yeah, for sure. And then,
yeah,
as this gets advanced, though, the only the next step is that once, it's very prevalent that, one person can now do the output of, 3, 5, 10 people, whatever, then you're going to see companies that are going to want to start implementing this into their workforce somehow and like actually train employees on it. And then at that stage, that's kind of going to be where they're also going to say, okay, we don't need to hire as many programmers as we once did, or we're not going to have to hire as many developers as we once did. And this is just going to continue to progress and stuff over time. And eventually, at least in my personal opinion, I think it's pretty inevitable that, you know, so many jobs are going to be taken to the point where like something is going to be necessary, like some sort of UBI where people, who don't, want to work don't necessarily have to. And that there's something that they could fall back on, like a UBI payment each month or something to just let them live a normal life, because, and it's not so much of like, I don't necessarily like to compare UBI to welfare, but I guess it kind of is in a way. But there's going to be a time where like so many jobs are taken and people just simply aren't going to be skilled enough versus computers to do these jobs. And so, there's just not going to be enough jobs for the amount of people that are out there. So like, what do we do for those people?
Right. It's just going to look totally different, and I don't even think it's possible to really fathom what it will end up looking like. And
Yeah.
in my mind, it's just so okay. So you're able to have this, you're able to sustain yourself without dedicating 40, 50, 60 hours of your week to work.
Hmm.
So what are you doing? So that's a whole area of questions and things we could
Yeah.
look into too.
Yeah. I think we could probably jump into that later on. Like it'd be fun to kind of explore the idea, okay, you're not working a normal job and you're getting X amount of money each month from the government or each year, however it's set up. What are you doing with all that free time? So I think that's something we could explore a bit towards the end of the podcast, but maybe we can kind of talk about like, what the stages of UBI, like how we kind of see it progressing over time. And like how are we going to pay for UBI, just kind of start from there and go through it all.
Yeah. But currently it's kind of, I feel like we're already in the early stages of UBI just because of the amount of eligible workforce that are choosing not to work. Um, the amount of
Hmm.
people that could work but are choosing not to. I recently heard Mike Rowe from Dirty Jobs. He was talking about that. There's actually more jobs available. No, no, do some logic here. There's more jobs available than there are people without jobs. So,
Okay.
uh,
Yeah.
so we're already starting to
So
see
by
this kind of
default, that tells
reliance.
you that, yeah, they just
Right.
simply
We're already
don't
starting to see this reliance
choosing
on it.
not to.
Yeah. So I guess this is just stage one, and where it goes from here. So there's probably a lot of different theories. Looks like you got some good stuff on Sam Altman.
Yes. Sam Altman he's been talking about this idea of UBI pretty much since Sam Altman, for the record, he's one of the founders of OpenAI. They're the company that made ChatGPT, GPT-3, etc. They're pretty much leading the space in AI by quite a large margin. And he's been talking about UBI like since the beginning of creating, OpenAI, just because he kind of from the get-go, he saw that, super advanced artificial intelligence or AGI, like this is inevitable and we should go ahead and start planning now, what is society going to look like once we get to this stage, as opposed to like it just kind of sneaks up on us and then all of a sudden like people are just losing jobs in mass and we don't know how to handle it. And so I think what a lot of people have talked about is like the traditional idea is kind of like, okay, AI is going to first start by taking out like the low skill manual labor jobs. And then from there, it'll kind of progress to like low skill white collar and then go to high skill white collar. And then the people that are going to be in the safest position are like the creatives, like the artists, the writers, musicians, and so on. And then something that we could talk about real quick is like we've actually kind of seen this happen in the reverse order. Like all of the big AI projects that are like gaining traction right now, they're all actually creative projects. So like you have Dolly, Midjourney. These are like prompt to image generators. So you can literally type in whatever you want pretty much, and you're going to get this absolutely beautiful image that's generated from just like a couple words. And so, um, and then also like Chat GPT, this is already starting to like increase the efficiency of coders and programmers, which this would fall into like the class of high skill white collar jobs. And so it's just interesting to think about like it's actually like the super high skilled creative people that are potentially going to be having job issues first, and then the people that are like the low skill white collar jobs, manual labor, blue collar, like they could actually end up in the best position for job security as AI continues to kind of progress.
Mhm. I think I would extend that just to all white collar jobs. Uh,
Sure.
really might be at the forefront of this thing because I was reading, I think it was on Twitter. It was just a Twitter feed of artists, and they were all saying like it's now really hard to get into entry level art positions because they can just generate this basic stuff um,
Right.
with Dolly and whatever. So as an English major, as a guy starting to write, I don't know how you I don't know how you navigate this yet, but it's also not clear like how much this AI generated art will be valued over or compared to human generated stuff.
Yeah. No, I agree. And that's something that, well, the interesting thing too is also like all of this AI generated art, like these systems were trained on human art. And so a lot of these images that are being generated, like you can find, kind of some examples online that are very similar that it probably learned from and took aspects of that. And so there's this whole conversation of like, you know, I guess not copyright, but just like arts or rights to the art that you've created. And like when these people put their work online, they aren't necessarily, I guess, agreeing to allowing some sort of AI to be trained off of their art and then generate stuff that's similar. They aren't agreeing to that. And like these companies like Midjourney are charging for these products and basically using all this artwork for free and then creating some sort of end product that they can charge for. And so a lot of artists are kind of up in arms against this and saying like, I don't want my work to be used for your guys' projects, and like, we deserve our own rights to these works and blah blah blah. So like that's a whole other interesting conversation. And I guess the same could be used for writers, like storytellers. Like AI is just kind
Right.
of navigating the internet freely and pulling whatever it wants from it and learning and then writing its own stuff. And so I guess how do you see that? Like, would you kind of agree with these artists that are kind of pissed off about this whole thing, or what do you think?
It's one of those situations where I definitely understand their point, but what what can they do?
Right.
Do they even have any power at all in the situation? Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think AI is going to do what it does, and that probably involves what you want to call it, stealing the work of others. I don't know. We'll call it that.
Yeah.
It's going to do that probably. I think the only thing we can do is like collectively decide, consciously decide, hey, we're going to value human produced things just as much as we used to, or even more. Because maybe, maybe we'll get like hipster with it and be like, oh, it's so retro. Like you made that yourself.
Hmm.
And who knows?
Yeah.
That could double the value. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's
I get their point. I just don't think they can do much about it.
no, I agree. I think, I think AI can very much be like an extremely good thing for humanity and society, there's probably going to be some people that you know, don't necessarily get the best end of it. Like there's pros and cons to it, and I think artists, for example, like I agree with you. I understand they don't like it, but at the same time, it's like there's no way really around this. Like there's no way to stop it. It's gonna happen. Choose
It,
to accept, and I could also see a scenario like you said where like it ends up benefiting them in the end because we're gonna value like human generated stuff versus AI generated stuff.
I think you're gonna have to. Um, and I mean, this is way down the line, but unless we get to some sort of scenario where we're integrated with the AI, uh,
Hmm.
as long as it's AI and us, we're gonna have to choose to do things the old fashioned way. But it's still different, like with hunting. People, you can go any second of the day to go get all the groceries you need, but people still go and do
True.
things on their own. And so
Yeah.
humanity, we're pretty good at keeping traditional things alive. So
Hmm. Yeah. And so yeah, Sam Altman, he's kind of covered all this stuff too, and he kind of also agrees with the idea that we're gonna see these higher level jobs get taken out first. Because a good way to think about it is like where, as someone who is actually building AI and charging money for these applications, like where do you want to spend the most of your resources on as far as like targeting a specific market? It's going to be the industries that have the most money in them, right? So programmers, lawyers, doctors, etc. You're going to want to build applications for this first, as opposed to like building robots that, go and mow your grass or something. Like that's kind of low hanging fruit, I think. And so it
real
kind of
quick,
makes sense when you think about it. Go ahead.
well, just to kind of get more specific, like to dive into how it could replace lawyers, because maybe that's probably really a really weird concept to think of if you're not familiar with
Yeah.
this stuff. But okay, so ChatGPT, you ask it a question, it surfs the whole internet, pulls out the information, and then produces a pretty well written article about it. Um, that's really easy to translate into doing a job of a lawyer. So let's say you're a prosecutor, you get a case, um, like a robbery case. Well, you're just gonna compare it to 20 other robbery cases to see kind of what you're working with. Well, that takes time. That takes a day, 2 days, 3 days. Well, Chat GPT or something like that, that'd be able to do it in 2 seconds.
Right.
So, I mean, it's minus the dealing with victims and the defendants, and then the delivery of the argument. Um, the,
Hmm.
the the labor based part of being a lawyer is gonna change like that, I imagine.
Yeah. No, I agree. And that also kind of just goes into another interesting idea. Like what, do we at a certain point when AI lawyers are so good, do we need to do this whole court thing where we have, people coming in and witnesses and et cetera? Like, is all of that still going to be necessary or can we just kind of interface with this AI lawyer slash judge, whoever, feed in all the
Right.
information of the case, and then whatever it spits out, that's kind of, what we're going to go
Yeah,
with.
it could just base it off the algorithm or off
Yeah.
an algorithm. I don't know. I guess that it's essentially no different than how it works now. Because so a judge, so let's say a murder trial, the jury decides if he's innocent or guilty, or if they're innocent or guilty. But then the judge has to take, like, if they are guilty, the judge has to take all the information, compare it to murder cases in the past,
Mm.
and then spit out a decision in terms of the sentence. That's essentially no different than uh, the function of an algorithm.
Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah, that's an interesting thought for sure. I think maybe we jump back a little bit to just, the stages of UBI that we were talking about previously. And so um, I think the whole question that is kind of up in the air at this point is like, we know that um, AI is eventually going to take lots of jobs, but we can also assume that, AI is going to create a bunch of jobs um, at the same time, jobs that we can't even necessarily imagine today. Just because so many different technological advancements are going to come from this, you can assume that, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to monetize this, businesses that stem from it. And so there's going to be this interesting balance of like, okay, how many jobs are being created from AI and how many are being taken away? And it's going to kind of teeter back and forth, at least initially, I think. Um, and then at some point, I think there's going to be this stage where so many jobs are being taken as opposed to being created that that's kind of where everyone needs to start, hopping on UBI. But like a good example of this would be like, you know, 10 years ago, you couldn't have predicted like social media influencers being like these people that just have lots of followers online and like people just are interested in what they're doing and they're making tens of millions of dollars a year. Like we could
And
have never imagined that in our head, before social media or like in the very early stages of it.
right. No, it used to be nothing but like Bear Grylls and the Kardashians, and now it's anybody with a
Right.
phone can have access to these huge markets. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting thought. But two, I think the tendency is to look at this AI revolution that's coming uh, through like a binary lens. Like it's either gonna be good or gonna be bad. But I think it's just gonna be uh, a complex mix of both. I think some people are really gonna benefit, and initially here, especially like individual business owners. And then some people are gonna get left in the dust, and it's probably gonna be beautiful and very tragic all at the same time.
Yeah.
Now, how you decide which end of this you're gonna end up on, I have no idea.
Right. And I think that's kind of the whole basis of this podcast in a way is like we're just kind of exploring the pros and cons and like the effects that AI is going to have on society and how exactly are people going to navigate this, because I think, this is kind of the same opinion as Sam Altman. I tend to agree. He thinks that assuming that we are able to, plan ahead and kind of have a good grasp of what the effects of AI are going to be, it's going to be a net positive for humanity as a whole. Um, and I would agree with that. I think there's definitely going to be a lot of people, like you said, that are affected negatively by this, but it's really going to be a matter of like educating people on what's going to happen and how can you use this to your advantage so you aren't just going to be left without a job and have no idea what to do, be depressed, unhappy, like there's definitely, I think, it's not going to be this like binary scenario where AI is just going to get so advanced robots are going to take over humanity and like we're just going to kind of be slaves to the robots. Like I don't agree with that take.
I
I
also
think
don't think
in
that,
general.
yeah, I don't think that works for humans. I think we revolt or go insane.
Yeah.
We are, we have been the superior being on this planet for a very long time, and it's just so ingrained in us now.
Yeah.
There, might be a big battle come out of that. I don't know. That's what
Yeah.
I'm
Now
envisioning.
that would be another interesting podcast episode we could do, just kind of explore, the scenarios of robots kind of like getting so advanced that they're just so far ahead of us. Like how exactly do they react to humans? Like, what's that relationship gonna be like?
Well, that's the whole theory behind Elon's
Neuralink.
Neuralink. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, that that'd be another episode we could do as well. I think um, that'd be a very interesting topic to dive into. But yeah, going back on the whole job creation aspect, I think these initial stages of AI, depending on how fast it progresses, maybe it's, the next couple of years or so, we're going to see tons of job creations that are going to come from this as more advanced applications come out. Um, like for example, you could have basically just like people that aren't even experts in any certain industry. They're just very good at using chat GPT or whatever other software it is, and they're able to monetize that in some way by providing services to people. Like you wouldn't have to be an expert in any certain area. You just need to be good at knowing how to interface with this technology. Um,
But that's nothing new. If you look at my situation with teaching, uh, traditionally you have to go to college, get your certification and all that, become an expert or something, and then you can start teaching. But like now, if you know how to act in front of a camera and you have to be smart and
yeah,
have valuable knowledge to give, but uh, with a relatively
yeah,
low barrier of entry, you can hop into this role as a teacher on YouTube or whatever.
yeah, 100%. And
It
I think it's
it
just
begs a question to me. And this is coming from a guy in school, but like, why are we going to school? The market's just going to be so different
yeah,
by the time everybody graduates, especially like the kids in middle school and high school. I'm not suggesting 12-year-olds drop out, but schools need to start jumping on this and adapting.
yeah. Yeah, I was telling you this other day, like I've seen a lot of tweets on how schools are reacting to like Chat GPT, for example. And I've seen some tweets of like schools that are just instantly banning it. Like you can't even access it on school servers, completely banned. And then I've seen other schools that are like sending out, informative emails to their students saying like, this is what Chat GPT is. Here's how to use it. Like we're going to start incorporating it into our curriculum. Like, and I think that's obviously the best way to do it because like students are going to use it regardless. Like even if you ban it, they're going to just use it when they go home to do homework or whatever. And also you're just like setting up those students for failure even more because everyone else is going to be utilizing these tools and they're going to be way more efficient than the students that don't know how to use it. So why
Yeah.
would you shelter them from this as a teacher or a school? I don't understand that logic at all.
No, they're basically, by doing it that way, preparing kids to come out uh, into a world that like the 1980s, but
Yeah.
it is not the 80s.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this the other day, like to think back when we graduated, the world's just totally different.
Yeah.
It, at least it feels different. Um, and so not only like at this moment am I trying to navigate the current situation, I'm also having to think, okay, what's this going to look like 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line? And I don't have an answer, but you're, you're having to, I don't know, like for me, I'm trying to get some things going for myself here. And it's like, well, A, the current situation, nobody fully understands just with increasing like social media and everything. Like we're just now starting to figure that out. But by the time we figure this out, it's going to be totally different again, probably. So
Yeah.
it's just a time where you got to be on your feet, got to be quick.
Oh, for sure. And I think the rate of progression that we've seen on technology, at least in our lifetime, like it's been extremely fast, like thinking back to when we're in middle school, elementary school or whatever, like you compare what the phones were then to where they are now, like it's mind blowing. And the scary part to think is like that rate of progression is only going to increase even further and further because all technology kind of follows this exponential curve of improvement. And AI, like I think, is at that inflection point where the line is not so much flat anymore. It's starting to go up a lot more. And eventually we're going to get to where it's like straight up. And at that point, it's like, how do you keep up? And I think when we kind of get to that more exponential increase, that's where the jobs are going to start becoming like a massive issue. And I think it's just going to be interesting to see like how people are going to adapt to things changing like every week basically. I mean, if you're kind of tapped into the whole AI world on social media or whatever, you're seeing some new sort of crazy application come out for AI like every other week, you know? And I would say the majority of the general population has no idea of this. Um, and so
Do
at
you
a
think
certain
that's how it's
point,
going to be though? That eventually it's going to be too hard to keep up, or so hard to keep up that the majority of people are just going to be like, we're out. We're just, whatever happens, happens.
yeah,
And we're buckled in.
I think there's certainly going to be a lot of people that do have that opinion. Yes. I think it'll be interesting to see like at what stage of technology does that start to happen, because the whole like going back on Neuralink, for example, like there's a lot of great health applications that Neuralink is focusing on now that are going to do amazing things for the world, like giving paraplegics possibly the ability to move again. People that are missing, all of their limbs, they can, interact with computers and communicate with people online normally, or like people that can't speak at all, they can speak to others through this, to the brain interface or whatever. Those are all great things, but Elon's true intention with this is to give humans a chance against I shouldn't say against the AI, but just living in a world where AI is, a million times more advanced than humans. And so
Mhm.
are we going to hit this rapid rate of improvement before we get there with Neuralink, or are we going to at least have Neuralink in a basic state where, the it's safe to use for the mass majority of people and it's affordable, etc. Like, which of those is going to come first? Because, AI could move faster than, like way faster than we're able to move, in the sense of getting these brain interfaces ready for people to use. And so we could be just completely left in the dust at that point?
Right. There's also the other option though. I mean, I'm not an engineer, but it'd be nice if we could get the AI to help us in the development of Neuralink. I guess that would be the ideal situation. But regardless, I mean, we're gonna have to figure it out because I think there's this common perception that it's like, oh, we'll get AI figured out. That'll kind of like be the nuts and bolts of our world, and then humans will just chill. But like humans aren't meant to chill. Um, we're meant to be out progressing and engaging, and so I think that's where we're gonna have to go. We're gonna have to figure out
Yeah.
how to keep up.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. And I think that that kind of sets the foundation of like why we think, UBI is going to be a very essential thing for people at some point. And so maybe now we can kind of go into like, you know, AI is going to theoretically pay for UBI. So what exactly does that look like? Like how are we going to like what's the actual structure of UBI going to look like? How much money are people going to get? Or all this is all just speculation, of course, but like it'll be interesting to kind of dive in and get an idea of what this is going to look like. So maybe we could
I would
start
like
with like, go ahead.
I'd like to just kind of preface like as of before 2020, leading up to the 2020 election, Andrew Yang, he was a candidate for that election, supposedly came out with a plan that theoretically would have worked, that we could have operated a functioning UBI program in 2020 without significant income, without a significant tax on the income that AI produces. Like it would have just been based off the economy we have now. Whether that's true in today's economy, I don't know. But something like this does seem to be theoretically possible.
Yeah. How far did you dive into that? Because I know he was a big proponent of UBI when he was running, but I didn't look into really the specifics of like was he giving like actual numbers of how much people would get and what all was he saying?
Yeah, so that's why I mentioned I don't know if it would work in today's economy. His plan would give everybody who needed it a grand a month. So
Okay.
I don't know how far that's going to get you in today's world, but
Right. Yeah, that I think the concept of UBI, it definitely has value, but a grand a month, that's more of just like you aren't
he was talking it up too. He was like acting like you get a grand a month, you just have the world by the balls. He was like, oh yeah,
right.
I'm like, I don't know if you
And
got
was
that.
that like per person, like for any age or just people over 18? Or like if someone has kids, are they getting a grand a month for those kids too? Do you know?
That I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, that's stuff interesting to think about. But so I guess, you know, what Sam Altman has kind of described, he calls it the American Equity Fund, which basically just means all American citizens are kind of, they theoretically own a stake of equity in America and like the economic creation is going to come from AI. And so the way he describes it is like there's going to be two of the most like dominant sources of wealth, and that's going to be AI or just companies that are utilizing AI, and then also land. And the land part I found interesting because obviously, like companies that use AI, like they're going to just create immense economic output. So like that's a given. That makes sense. But the land aspect, he was kind of saying like the value of land is going to greatly appreciate because it's like in today's world, the value of land goes up because of all of the work and economic value that's created around it. So, you buy a piece of land and, you know, a new neighborhood that just sprung up. Like all these houses and stuff that are going to be built around your house eventually around your land, that's, value that's being added into that area. And so theoretically the value of your land is going to go up over time. Or like, down the street they build a grocery store. Okay, the value of your land just went up even more. And so he's kind of taking this concept and pairing it with the fact that AI is going to like massively increase economic output in every area. And so land is just going to, the value of land is just going to continuously rise over time because, the businesses that are buying land are just going to be printing money from whatever they're doing. And so, yeah, the more land they can get their hands on, the better. I mean, does that kind of make sense in your head? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would imagine land appreciates greatly just from the need for more privacy, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So, if we're all living in a world essentially where everything's equitable, like we're all earning the same amount of money, well, then how do we acquire things that we want? Um, so in my mind, like if you're going to need to own the land coming into this thing, and then once all the land gets sucked up, just that need to like get away to whatever, it's just going
Right.
to jack the price of the land up.
Yeah.
If that does that make sense?
No, it
Because
does.
I guess
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out like, okay, if I don't make money by 2040, am I going to be able to get the 10 acres that I want? Or
Right.
uh,
Yeah. No, that's, I mean, Well, that's an interesting thing to think about too, is like so much, you know, the GDP of our country, or whatever, is just going to increase so much, and companies are going to become so efficient that they're going to be able to use the extra money that they're making to expand operations. That's going to require them to purchase more land, and like, we live in southern Indiana, which is by no means a booming town whatsoever, but and there's lots of land everywhere here, but we're already kind of seeing, a lot of it's already becoming a lot more developed than it once was. And as our economy as a whole continues to like ramp up, we're going to see even more of that. And so that is interesting to think, like, like you were saying, you want to buy a bunch of land when you have the opportunity to do so. But like, if companies are just kind of beating everyone to it, then it may be completely out of reach for people.
Right.
Especially
And
when,
if I have no way to compete in the market, and increase my income, how could I even afford it?
yeah,
The other thought I had too was like, if our national well-being is solely dependent on the income that is generated by these AI based companies, then, um, will these companies have the right to come in and just buy the land they need to expand? What's it called when, let's say they need, like, they're going to expand a road or they're going to put it in interstate. So you like essentially have to sell that chunk of land to the government. Do you know what that's called off the
oh,
top of your head?
I I don't know the term for that, but I get what you're saying. Like, you basically you have no choice but to forfeit your land for whatever price they're going to give you.
Right. So is that going to be a thing? I mean, is there going to be any private uh, land owned by families, people, and our companies?
Yeah, and especially in the world of UBI, like, theoretically, you know, that stake of land could be used for a business that's going to generate money and pay into the UBI tax or whatever that's going to be. And so they can kind of use that against you in a way of saying, like, you holding on to this land just for your own personal benefit does nothing for the greater society.
Right.
And so
Oh, it's so
you need to
overwhelming.
hand it over. I know. So you need to hand it over to us, and we can build a business here, and that's going to help the rest of the country. That's that's a scary thing to think about for sure.
Right. I just kind of like, God, I don't want to. My natural instinct when I think about these things is to be a downer about it, but I'm trying not to be. But I just can't help envisioning us all in the future, like living in these like government communist style pods or whatever.
Right.
I don't know. Hopefully that's not the case, but
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a scenario that could play out. No, but I agree that, like, that's not the route that we'd want to go. And then I think maybe we should add more context to what, the Sam Altman's concept for UBI. So what he's kind of proposing is, so companies that are over a certain size, and he didn't specify, but each year, 2.5% of their market value is going to be taxed. So if you have a company that is, a $1 billion in size, then what is that? Can't do math right now. 2.5 billion is going to go into, this UBI fund every single year. And then on top of that, you're also going to tax 2.5% of all privately held land. And I'm not sure if that's annual either. I would assume that it probably is, but um, either way, 2.5% of companies that are supposedly using AI, and I think it's safe to assume that every massive company is going to be using AI. So you would just tax all of them. And so all of this money is getting into the, American Equity Fund, and then it's just evenly distributed to all citizens that are over 18. And they're free to use this money, however they want to or however they need to. And then, so as AI continues to just kind of increase the economic output of everything, value of companies are growing, the value of land is growing, the annual payments that companies are making into the UBI fund each year are increasing. And so in turn, all of the money that people are getting each year is also increasing. So they kind of grow linearly with each other. And I at first thought, I think this is probably the best concept for UBI that I've seen, just because the incentives are still aligned to focus on, the development of AI, and this like as AI continues to get way more advanced and take more jobs, then people are just receiving bigger payments for them to use, however they would like to do. So what are your kind of thoughts on that? Like, do you kind of see that being a good structure? Do you see any downsides to it?
So no, I'm trying to grapple with the idea, like, what happens to money when we all have equal amounts of it? That's, I can't quite put my finger on why that's weird to me, but does it mean anything?
Well,
If we all,
to
can,
add to that,
yeah, go
I was just saying
take
to
it.
add to that real quick, like this is so Elon talks about this a lot. It's like he's like when you have AI that, is able to do everything that we want it to do and produce what we want to produce, like what even is an economy in that world? What
Right.
value does money have when everything is just presumably so cheap to produce and create, and you know like what is an economy at that point? Like what does it look like, um
Yeah, I just can't even get my head around it, to be honest.
yeah.
Um, the so I think we're gonna have to expand our scope. So and try and figure out what we're gonna be doing with our time. And in my eyes, I think a lot of us, you mentioned a couple weeks ago, like, we're gonna have access to specifically created entertainment.
Right.
So I almost think, like, we're gonna have our real lives and then our digital lives. Uh, so you'll, like, zone out, you'll, like, log off your freaking mega Oculus by that point, and you'll, like, eat your crap beans that is given to you by whoever, and then you'll log back on, where then you enter a world where there is an economy and you are starting a business and you're friggin' conquering countries. Like, you're doing human things, but in the digital world, because in the human world, there's no place for it.
Everything's already taken care of. Yeah.
Right. Uh,
So
I don't
Ready Player
know.
One, basically.
Pretty much. Yeah.
uh
Yeah. I'm trying to write, like, a short story, so we'll see if it
mhm.
turns out. Like, it describes
So-
this, like, awesome day this guy has. And then he, like, his Oculus, like, runs out of battery, which won't be a thing with vision. But then he just wakes
yeah.
up and he's like this, like, fat slob with a can of beans to his left, and he's in a dark, shitty apartment. And he's like, oh,
That's
damn.
awesome. That's a Black Mirror episode right there.
That's what I thought. Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, another thing to kind of think about too is like, so AI is increasing the economic value of everything, and each year, um, the amount that people are receiving is also increasing. And he kind of described it the way he described, or he kind of ran the rough numbers and the current state of everything. So he kind of assumed, I don't remember exactly what it was, but like our country's GDP doubling within the next decade, and the value of land in as a whole doubling also within the next decade. So if you just take those two assumptions, then you're taxing the companies at 2.5% and land at 2.5% each year. And then also distributing that to everyone that is above 18, you roughly get about $10,000 a year per person. And
Right.
while that doesn't Go ahead.
real quick, that makes that creates an interesting predicament for landowners because you then have to be able to afford that
The
2.5%. And I
tax.
don't know what I don't know what land tax is now. I assume it's not 2.5%. But yeah, that would then exclude a certain number of people from buying and owning land, or
Yeah.
force them to get into making money somehow.
Yeah, I thought about that as well. Like, you have people that put literally every penny they have into buying a house and the land that it's on, and they're struggling to make payments. And then, on top of that, you're asking them to pay 2.5% of the entire value of their land each year. Like, some
Right.
people aren't going to be able to make those payments, but I think
Right.
that's another.
So, but what I guess that brings to mind, like, how much is the individual going to benefit from this tech, uh, from this innovation? Because like we were kind of talking about earlier, your ability to increase your output as an individual is crazy. And so maybe are we thinking about this wrong? Like, is it going to be companies that are producing all this income, generating all this income, or is it going to be individuals who can now outcompete these large corporations thanks to the help of AI? Is that a scenario?
I think it definitely is, and I would assume like the most likely scenario is a mixture of both. Because I think there's always going to be the companies that are just so absurdly advanced and powerful that like individuals can't even like they just won't be able to compete. And so maybe what you kind of see is like this distribution of power where there's going to be maybe a lot less larger companies than there are now, but they're just going to be absurdly massive. So a small number of like these massive companies that are just like extremely advanced and powerful, and then you also have, you know, a very large number of individual creators or workers or doing whatever it is that they do.
So in my mind, what makes sense is like you have only a select amount of open AIs. You're these large companies that are making the advancements in AI, but then from there you just have like nothing but individuals using their advancements to do whatever they're going to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, because like I mean, you're seeing it now. These huge institutions outside of AI are crumbling. CNN just closed their headquarters, um, which is crazy. And I think like colleges are going to start to go, but that's kind of a side thing. But yeah, like the individuals are going to be able to compete with these large corporations that aren't in charge or involved with AI.
Yeah. No, I agree with that 100%. And that's just kind of like the natural evolution of capitalism, right? Like the companies that aren't continuing to rapidly innovate, they're going to be left behind. They're going to have to shut down. And then, so AI is only going to enhance that. The companies that you know, aren't able to keep up, that could be outperformed by just a bunch of individual business operators or creators, like they're going to be left behind. And then, but also leaves like you were saying, there's going to be a very select number of companies that are kind of controlling and leading this, the development of these technologies. And so what does that look like, where we only have a couple of very large corporations that have presumably a ton of control over, you know, the technology that everyone else is using. Like that's a scary thought to think of as too.
Yeah. And I think that's going to shift the way we think of government. And I mean, just sitting here thinking like we're almost going to have to, uh, this is just like so crazy to even say, but we're almost going to have to adjust the Constitution and like just the total structure of our government because uh, we're going to need to figure out the balance of power uh, that these between these companies and the power they have over us, I guess.
No, 100%. I agree. So yeah, I'm gonna jump back to the UBI talk because another interesting point that Sam Altman made was like it's like I was saying like the rough numbers that he ran would mean about $10,000 a year per person for everyone that's over the age of 18. This would be a decade from now, and while that does not sound like a ton of money, and it isn't, but a good thing to keep in mind is like as AI continues to advance so much and companies are utilizing it more, then the cost of goods and services or the cost to make these and produce them are going to drop dramatically. The article that he wrote was Moore's Law for everything, which basically he was just saying like you can imagine a world where every every 2 years, the cost to make whatever it is that's being made is going to drop in half. And that's going to happen every 2 years continuously forever, until you kind of hit like this lower, minimum. Um, and so that $10,000, theoretically, the purchasing power of that $10,000 should be much greater than it is today, which is interesting to think about because we're experiencing the exact opposite happen with inflation. And we're seeing our purchasing power with money just kind of like over the past couple of years, it's diminished quite a bit.
And has been really for uh, several decades.
Well, sure, yeah, but more rapidly, over the
Right.
past
Right.
couple of years.
It's just a large trend is interesting. You think as we progress, we figure out how to make shit cheaper and whatever else.
Yeah,
But for some reason we do not.
right, right. And it's interesting to think about like how a lot of people now are kind of saying that inflation is kind of getting away from us and we're not able to, control it and reel it in. Whereas we've kind of grown at a relatively stable rate of inflation of like 3% a year or whatever for the past, couple decades. Obviously there's like spikes and stuff in between, but like we always kind of return back to that mean of around 3% per year. Um, but it'd be interesting to think that like at the same time where like inflation is supposedly getting away from us and we aren't able to bring it back in. On the flip side, we're going to have AI that is going to become so advanced and start to, reduce the cost to make everything. That's massively deflationary. And so, you know, it's like, it's almost like perfect timing in a sense where, inflation is just, it's getting away from us, but at the same time, we're going to have AI kind of come in and counteract that and actually do the complete opposite and make our purchasing power, continuously grow over time. Um, and so, I mean, do you kind of see a scenario playing out where like what happens when everything becomes so cheap and this, payment that we're getting every single year continues to increase, then it's like we have this money to spend, but like you were saying earlier, like does it even have that much value anymore because everything is just so cheap. Like all the essentials that we have are covered, like do we even need to get this payment to use? Like what are we going to spend it on, Like
um, I don't know. Like God is like, I'm just picturing it. All of us always like going to the beach and just sipping Mai Tais and just living like kings. Maybe that's what happens. It also seems dangerous. We all become able to do whatever we want and whenever we want. Unless want to do not great things, but
yeah.
it's our. This is a Jordan Peterson quote, but humans degrade. It's not a quote; it's one of his ideas. But humans tend to degrade over time, just when left to their own natural instincts. So the fact that that could potentially be endlessly funded,
Yeah.
that may not go great. So
Yeah.
I think it, it's just, it's interesting because we're heading towards this like collective society based around the, this, all this innovation in AI. And it takes, that naturally takes the attention away from the individual, but the situation it creates, I think, is going to force us all to increase our own individual responsibility. We're going to have to make decisions to listen to all these new, like, not self-help podcasts, but you're just going to have to find some sort of environment that you can really just like continuously push yourself to be better. And you're going to have to consciously do that.
Yeah. Um,
You're going to have
so do
to
you,
choose to learn, choose to be uncomfortable, choose to work out, choose to,
yeah.
whatever else. So,
And I think too, an important part that we've kind of left out of this so far is like, we've kind of touched on some of the potential negatives of this scenario happening, but like possibly one of the greatest, you know, pros of all of this is like we're pretty much solving poverty entirely, like
mm,
for people that have lost their way and ended up in an unfortunate situation where they're unemployed and not able to make payments, or even people that are just they've been homeless, like it's this kind of gives them, another opportunity to restart, or at least just live at the very minimum, a basic life of like having some sort of shelter and food consistently, and they never have to worry about that again. Um, and so something to think about is like what happens when we kind of, what happens to society as a whole when we just completely eliminate poverty and bring all of these people back in? Like, there's potentially a lot of people that, would have gone on to do incredible things for society, but like because of the circumstances that they end up in, where they're homeless or payment to payment or whatever, they didn't have the opportunity to do that. And so I think that's like a massive net positive to society, or obviously it's positive, but I mean, like, it could have a much more profound effect than we think, as opposed, like, compared to just like bringing in people off the streets. Like, I think they're going to be able to contribute in ways that we can't really, imagine right now.
yeah, no, I certainly think there'll be a percentage of the population that we get to like reincorporate in this sounds so messed up, but like into productive society because they
Right.
fell out due to
Yeah.
circumstances beyond their control. But, so that's a certain to the people. But then there are also like groups of people that made decisions that got themselves in that situation. And I don't think money's gonna necessarily fix that. So that maybe that's specifically the people who need to be like, all right, I got a second chance here. Let's watch some Andrew Huberman or whoever and get
Yeah.
this shit going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. You're always going to have a little bit of both. But I guess that can kind of lead us into like the discussion questions that we're saving for the end here. Like, just kind of, initial thoughts, what is like a large percentage of our population not working? Like, what does that look like? I mean, we've touched on it a little bit before. Like, people are going to have to figure out what their lane is going to be. Um, but like, is there any initial ideas that you have of like creative outlets that people could potentially be getting into? Or like, is it just kind of too early to even, speculate on that?
I don't know about creative outlets. I think what comes to my mind would be prioritizing relationships with family. Who knows? Maybe there's a resurgence in religion or spirituality. You have all this time to sit around and like meditate. Uh,
Right.
yeah. So other than that, I don't know. There could be a lot of beauty that comes from it for sure. If you decide to tighten your bonds with the people around you and everything else, but In terms of what people are actually going to do other than entertain themselves and hang out with family, I have no idea.
Yeah. No, I'm in the same boat there. That'll definitely be interesting to see play out because like me personally, like, and you would be in the same boat as me, like, we enjoy being productive and challenging ourselves and not just our personal lives, but like professional lives as well, like having something to really work on and learn from and grow a business or whatever it might be. Like we would not operate that well in a world where everything is just kind of handed to us and like we don't have to like there's not much for us to do. Um
Right.
and there's a lot of people that are like that. And so it'll be
Y-
interesting to see like go ahead.
Yeah. And not to get dark with it again, but that there's a real danger in that, kind of people of our mindset, like who want to do stuff. We actually need to do it. Otherwise we'll go crazy.
Right.
So I'm reading a book about that right now with
Mm,
Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment.
okay.
So it's something we're gonna have to figure out for sure.
Hmm. And not only that, just like for the sake of our mental state, but also just like the evolution of humans in the future. Like what's going to happen to future generations that, you know, didn't have to go through the same, struggles that we have to go through now because all of their stuff is just kind of solved for them, like what's going to happen to
Mhm.
the future, like generations and generations. Um, like, are they just going to be accustomed to not really having to, like I think it's like kind of innate in our for most humans that where like we want something to like, you know, strive for. Does that just kind
Mhm.
of fade away over time? Like that's another
That would
interesting
take a
thing to
long
think about
time,
too.
but
Sure.
it just I think it depends how we if we're able to integrate with AI. I think that's just gonna things are gonna happen because of that I just can't even possibly predict or imagine or
100%.
this
Yeah.
point. But I think maybe we just expand our frontier. So um, we solve everything we need to solve here on Earth, more or less, and then well, there's plenty of problems to go figure out on Mars or whatever. So
Yeah. That's probably my favorite scenario. I mean, I got the space shirt going here. Like in a
right.
world where we can just kind of go out and explore wherever and like rebuild, you know, our own like other worlds, like that would just be, that's incredible to think about for sure. And I do think that's, I mean, at least in our lifetime, we'll get to see us go to Mars and like, you know, some level of space exploration. How advanced that gets, that's to be determined. But I do agree. Like maybe we just kind of eventually lead into like, okay, if you want to just like chill, live a normal life, then Earth is the place for you. But like, if you want to do other stuff, then like maybe go, like you said, Mars or anywhere else. Really, like that's going to be where
Hmm.
like the working classes are at.
Yeah. No, I that's really exciting to me. I,
Agreed.
at this moment, I'm thinking I was born a generation too early or something. I think we're going to miss that train, but that'd be cool if that's what ends up happening.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. And then another question that you put on here, we'll kind of wrap it up here with this one. What would blockchain technology kind of make the most sense for implementing and executing UBI? What are your thoughts on that?
Seems like the most efficient and effective way for sure. Uh,
Hmm.
I'm not too familiar with blockchain technology, but I have to imagine that it's a lot easier to regulate from the um, general public's perspective than if you have um, just a entity of government officials or whoever um, being in charge of the collection and redistribution of money. I'm not a big government guy in general. So yeah,
Hmm.
I'm all for getting this blockchain.
Yeah. No, I agree, but I do have some like I can kind of play devil's advocate here. let's just assume that, the US kind of converts to, a digital currency. We do have UBI set up and it's distributed through the blockchain through this digital currency. There's a lot of potential privacy concerns there, particularly with the government, where like if they're the ones that are operating this transfer of funds from, the UBI tax to distributing it to Americans on the blockchain, then like theoretically they can track what everyone is doing with that money. So like on their end, they have all of these, you know, crypto addresses that are tied to your identity, and then they're distributing the money to you through this. And then everything on the blockchain is public. It's public ledger. So they could just select whoever they want to select and see the full list of payments that you've made, where that money's going, what you're using it for. Now, how do they use that against you? I don't really know, but like a lot of people would just rather, not have to even think about that. What they do with their money is nobody else's business. But presumably if you are doing all of this on the blockchain, that may not necessarily be the case unless there's some sort of way that you could design it to where you have privacy in mind.
Right. Maybe, maybe like cash makes a resurgence and you get your paycheck or whatever, and then you go cash it out and you can spend it as you want. I don't know, but that's a good point for sure.
Yeah. But I do think like, I do agree that I think blockchain technology would probably make the most sense for this, or at least just some sort of, digital currency that our whole country is using. All businesses operate with this. Like it would just make things so much easier. And also like we would, it could potentially combat against inflation because you can just see instantaneously like exactly how much money is in circulation, and we never have to really worry about that. But I do think there's a lot still to be determined as far as like, how are we gonna structure this in a way that's like safe for everyone to use, in a sense where like, everything you do with your money is not public. So that's left to be determined, but maybe that does, maybe we do end up
Yeah,
there.
there's
It's just kind
some
of hard to say today.
real, there's some real interesting situations that I would not want to be in if every purchase ever made was public. Could you imagine like just such like private, intimate details about people would come out? Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, 100%.
I don't want to know what my family's buying, or there's just that kind of thing to know.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%.